Welcome, 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 deep divers. Get ready because today we're peeling back the layers on something incredibly vital and let's be honest, maybe a little bit unnerving. We're looking at the invisible infrastructure that powers our digital lives. We're plunging deep into the heart of the modern digital ecosystem. It's this world we all navigate daily, right? But it harbors this surprising, even alarming dark side. A pervasive surveillance apparatus. Just think about it. Every single day, without really noticing, your clicks, your taps, your searches, the very ways you move through your digital world generate an absolute torrent of personal data. And this isn't just evaporating into thin air. No way. It's feeding a system that, on one hand, is kind of beautifully efficient in how it operates, but on the other is profoundly unsettling in its implications. Our mission today: follow the hidden threads of this data from your devices through those massive corporate servers and ultimately maybe into the hands of state agencies. It's a journey that reveals this complex interwoven web of power. And once you see it clearly, it might just change everything about how you think about your privacy.
That's it exactly. What we're really uncovering in this deep dive is this undeniably symbiotic and frankly quite perilous relationship. It's really blossomed between the relentless drive of corporate data collection and the, well, ever-expanding reach of government monitoring. Our task here is to dissect this surveillance nexus, as we're calling it, to truly grasp how advanced technologies are effectively weaponizing our personal information, turning what might seem like these benign data points into active tools of monitoring and control.
Right, weaponizing it.
Precisely. And this ultimately poses a fundamental threat to individual autonomy, certainly, to free expression, and indeed to the very core tenets of a democratic society. And it's critical to understand right from the start that the weight of this surveillance isn't shared equally. Not at all. It falls disproportionately on marginalized communities, which just highlights how inadequate our current legal and ethical frameworks really are when it comes to protecting everyone.
Okay, so now that we've kind of sketched out the broad landscape, let's dig into the bedrock. The foundation of this whole system: personal data. It's truly the new oil, isn't it? Fueling the entire digital economy and, well, enabling the sophisticated system of monitoring. So when we talk about this pervasive architecture of data collection, what are the two primary pillars it's built on?
Well, at its core, this entire modern surveillance architecture rests on a dual foundation, sort of the two-pronged thing. On one side, you have what we call the corporate data engine. This is almost entirely driven by a business model that is fundamentally rooted in surveillance. And then on the other side, there's the state's ever-expanding reach, which increasingly relies on getting its hands on these massive privately held data troves.
Right, the data the companies collected first.
Exactly. So to truly grasp the full scope of the privacy challenges we're facing, understanding both of these pillars is crucial. How they function individually, and maybe more importantly, how they interact and feed off each other.
Okay, let's start with that first pillar then. The corporate data engine. This is where most of us interact with the system every single day, right? Often without even realizing the true scale of what's happening. We hear the term surveillance capitalism thrown around a lot. How is data collection not just some incidental byproduct, a little extra info they pick up along the way, but the actual core business model for these tech giants? And can you give us a sense of just how staggering the breadth of data they're collecting really is?
Yeah, it's staggering is the right word. For many of the biggest tech companies, data collection isn't just part of their business. It is their business model, unequivocally.
Yeah.
The entire economic logic of what we now call surveillance capitalism. It's built around incentivizing these companies to extract every single piece of personal information they can get their digital hands on.
Every piece.
Pretty much. This data isn't just stored either. It's meticulously analyzed, it's profiled, and then crucially, it's monetized. And the primary way they do that, hyper-targeted advertising. This relentless economic drive has, in turn, fueled the creation of perhaps the most sophisticated and, frankly, comprehensive human monitoring infrastructure in recorded history.
Wow.
The sheer volume and intimacy of the data gathered by major players like Google, Meta, which of course used to be Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. It's genuinely mind-boggling. Every time you interact with an app or a service, even if it feels completely harmless, you're generating a constant stream of information, and that flows directly into corporate servers.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about your name and email here, not basic stuff.
No, I imagine it's much deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about deeply sensitive personal details. Your precise location data, down to your exact longitude and latitude, pulled straight from your phone's GPS or other sensors, your unique IP address, every single search term you've ever typed into their search engine. detailed records of your website and app activity, what you click on, how long you stay,
Everything.
everything. They also collect biometric data, things like facial scans used for photo tagging or voice prints from your smart speakers, your health and fitness information, your complete financial records, purchase histories, your entire contact list,
And even the content of your communications.
the actual content, like emails.
Yes. Whether that's emails in Gmail, posts on social media, comments you make online. Take Google, for example. Security researchers have identified them as arguably the most prolific data collector out there. Yeah. Hoovering up info from your precise location, your complete browsing history, all your activity on third-party websites that happen to use Google services, like ads or analytics. And yes, even the content inside your Gmail account.
That's invasive. It is. Similarly, Meta systematically collects data on every person, every piece of content, and every experience you interact with across their vast ecosystem. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. It's truly comprehensive. They want the full picture.
That's a powerful point. It's not just abstract curiosity driving this collection, is it? It's purposeful. So what is the real engine behind this insatiable hunger for our data? Because it truly feels voracious. What are these companies getting out of it?
Well, the primary engine, without a shadow of a doubt, is immense financial incentive. It's about the money. This isn't just data collection for its own sake, for fun. All this meticulously collected information is used to build incredibly detailed user profiles. And those profiles are then leveraged for hyper-targeted advertising. That's the core.
And that's where the big bucks are.
Exactly, and that's where the profit explodes. Just look at the numbers. Google, for instance, pulled in a mind-blowing $61 billion, billion with a B, in advertising revenue in just the fourth quarter of 2021 alone.
61 billion in one quarter.
In one quarter. That kind of profitability creates an incredibly powerful self-perpetuating incentive to continuously expand and deepen their data collection practices. Why stop if it's that profitable?
But it's not just advertising anymore either. That's changing too. These companies are constantly finding new ways to enrich their profiles, new ways to monetize. We've seen reports of these sort of backroom deals, right? Like Google's alleged agreement with MasterCard to acquire consumer spending records, linking online activity to offline purchases.
Oh, okay. That connects the dots.
It does. And now, a new and rapidly growing market for this data is the burgeoning field of artificial intelligence. Tech companies are selling vast data sets to AI firms for training large language models, literally creating entirely new revenue streams from what is essentially your digital footprint. Your life online is training AI.
So our data is now the fuel for AI development too. Precisely. The net result of this entire business model is the creation of these centralized, privately controlled dossiers of unparalleled detail on literally billions of people. These aren't just abstract files. They are comprehensive, intimate portraits of our lives, built from every digital crumb we leave behind. Now, companies will often frame this expensive data collection as, necessary for personalizing services or improving user experience, and sometimes it does.
Sure, we get convenience out of it sometimes.
Right. But the primary, undeniable driver is commercial exploitation. That's the bottom line. This creates a fascinating paradox, though. While this data is undeniably the lifeblood of these corporations, fueling their profits, enabling their services, it is also simultaneously a significant potential liability, a huge risk, a kind of toxic asset, if you will.
Toxic asset? How so?
Well, holding on to such vast quantities of sensitive personal information exposes these companies to immense legal, financial, and reputational risks. Just think, one significant data breach, and it can lead to staggering fines under regulations like Europe's GDPR or California's CCPA. Not to mention costly litigation and potentially a catastrophic loss of consumer trust. That's hard to win back.
Right. That makes sense. A huge liability.
It is. This inherent conflict is a central challenge for modern corporate data governance. And in response, many corporate accountability initiatives, like the principle of data minimization, the idea of collecting only the data that is absolutely necessary for a specific purpose, are increasingly being viewed not just as sort of ethical ideals, but as pragmatic risk mitigation strategies.
So collect less, have less risk.
Exactly. By simply limiting the amount of this potentially toxic data they hold, they reduce their liability if something goes wrong. It's just good business sense, in a way.
It really paints a picture of a double-edged sword, doesn't it? Data is gold, but it's also radioactive almost. And speaking of the kind of data collected, our sources included a really insightful table. It highlights the commonalities and differences among major tech companies: Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. across various data categories. We see categories like personal identifiers, precise location, browsing and search history, financial and purchase data. Pretty much everyone collects those, right?
That's generally true, yes. Those are
Right.
quite common across the board.
But then there are some particularly striking details in that table. Can you highlight maybe one or two of these differences for us? For instance, what about biometric data? Who collects that, and what does that imply?
Absolutely. That table is really illuminating because it drives home how pervasive data collection is. But also, yeah, those subtle differences tell a story. When we look at biometric data, for instance, things like fingerprints, face scans, voice prints, you'll notice that Google and Meta are specifically identified as collecting it, whereas Amazon and Microsoft are not explicitly listed for that category in this particular comparison.
Okay, so Google and Meta, why them specifically, do you think?
Well, it suggests that companies whose services are deeply integrated with your identity,
Mm,
maybe relying on facial recognition for photo tagging, like on Facebook or Google Photos, or perhaps voice commands for their smart devices like Google Assistant. They are specifically focused on building these unique biological identifiers into their user profiles. It's core to their services.
right, like tagging your face in photos.
Exactly. For Meta, it's definitely related to facial recognition for tagging in photos or maybe profile verification across their platforms. This distinction tells us that while general identifiers are universal, certain companies are pushing into a much more intimate realm of data, and that carries entirely different implications for privacy and security. Especially since biometric data is unique, right? You can't change your face if it gets compromised like you can a password.
That's a very good point. Unique and unchangeable.
Mhm. Similarly, while most might collect some health data, maybe from fitness trackers or apps you connect, the table notes that only Google and Meta are explicitly listed as collecting broader health and fitness data,
Mm.
suggesting maybe a deeper integration into wearable tech or health-related app ecosystems they run or partner with. This level of detail, honestly, starts to build an incredibly comprehensive digital clone of you. It knows your habits, your health, your face.
A digital clone. That's quite a phrase. Okay, so if corporations built this massive data collecting machine primarily for profit, then who are its most powerful users? And how exactly do they access it? Because that's where the state's reach comes in, right? Connecting to this whole system.
You're absolutely right. That's the other side of the coin. While corporations built this machine for commercial gain, governments have emerged as its incredibly powerful users. They're leveraging it extensively for purposes of law enforcement and national security. The state surveillance capabilities, broadly speaking, fall into three main categories. You've got bulk data collection, targeted surveillance, and online surveillance. And it's really important to understand that these methods are almost never used in isolation. They often work together.
Okay, so three main ways.
Right. And they frequently leverage both government-run operations and, very significantly, tapping into those vast data repositories held by the private sector, the ones we just talked about.
Got it. So can you break those three down for us? Let's start with bulk data collection.
Sure. Bulk data collection involves the indiscriminate gathering of enormous volumes of data, typically without a specific suspect or target initially in mind. It's like casting a huge net. The objective here is to amass such a comprehensive trove of information that it can later be analyzed. You sift through it later, to identify patterns, connections, or potential threats that weren't obvious at the outset. The most infamous example, of course, is the National Security Agency's, the NSA's mass metadata collection program.
The Snowden revelations. Right?
Exactly. Brought to light by Edward Snowden. That program systematically collected the phone records, just the metadata, like who called who and when, not the content, but of millions of Americans, every single day. But it's not just phone data. This also includes harvesting data from social media platforms and even using cell tower data to track the movements of large populations, where people are congregating. This kind of mass surveillance is usually justified under the very broad umbrella of overarching national security needs, effectively allowing agencies to collect first and ask questions or identify targets later.
Collect it all, sort it out later. Seems efficient, but also worrying.
It is. Then there's targeted surveillance. In contrast to bulk collection, this method zeroes in on specific individuals or groups, people who are already under some level of suspicion. This category includes traditional investigative techniques that have simply been updated for the digital age, things like classic wiretapping, interception of communications, as well as physical surveillance, like directly following a person's movements. Old school stuff, but still used.
Still happening.
In the online realm, it means the dedicated tracking and monitoring of specific individuals' digital activities, their emails, their browsing. For this, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, enacted way back in 1978, was established to provide a legal framework and, importantly, judicial oversight for surveillance of foreign powers and their agents.
Okay, so FISA was originally for foreign targets.
Primarily, yes. However, in the post-9/11 era, the authority granted under FISA has been controversially expanded, significantly expanded. Programs like the NSA's warrantless wiretapping, conducted without judicial oversight from 2001 to 2006, significantly blurred the lines between foreign intelligence gathering and domestic surveillance, which sparked intense debate, as you can imagine.
I remember that huge debate about executive power, constitutional rights.
Exactly. And finally, the third category is online surveillance, which is really a more specific subset of these activities, focusing exclusively on monitoring digital life. This involves the direct monitoring of online communications, like your email and chat logs, the detailed tracking of an individual's web browsing history and search queries, and the use of increasingly sophisticated tools to monitor activity across social media platforms.
That's a lot of different avenues for monitoring, both by the government directly and, crucially, through these private companies. So the critical element here, then, it really seems to be that nexus, right? That link between the state and the corporate data engine. It's not just about what the government can collect itself, but how easily it can tap into these privately held reservoirs of our data. And the numbers, honestly, are pretty eye-opening. I saw a statistic. In just the first 6 months of 2020 alone, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies issued over 112,000 legal requests for user data to companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft.
Over 100,000 requests in just 6 months.
Yeah, and these companies accommodated approximately 85% of those requests. They handed over the data.
That statistic really brings home the core of this symbiotic relationship. It's not theoretical. Corporations, driven by their profit motives, are effectively building and maintaining this vast surveillance machine for their own ends. We established that. But the state, driven by law enforcement and national security objectives, becomes its most powerful and indeed its most frequent user. This dynamic means that any meaningful attempt to rein in government surveillance is intrinsically linked to regulated corporate data practices. You can't separate them easily.
So controlling the corporate data collection would limit the government's reach, too.
Exactly. As some analysts have powerfully argued, implementing broader data privacy and security protections for consumers would directly and critically, secondarily, reduce national security surveillance risks. Why? Simply by shrinking the total pool of available data for everyone, thereby limiting what the government can access, even with legal requests like warrants or subpoenas. It's a fundamental supply-side solution to what often feels like a demand-side problem. Less data exists, less can be accessed.
That makes a lot of sense. Cut off the supply. Okay, so moving on. It's clear that this data isn't just sitting there passively in servers. These vast repositories are the fuel for a new generation of surveillance technologies. Technologies that actively monitor and analyze behavior at an unprecedented scale. These aren't just passive recording devices anymore. They are intelligence systems designed to interpret, flag, even predict actions. We're going to dive into 3 key pillars of this technological vanguard now. Social media intelligence, or SOCMIT, facial recognition technology, FRT, and the truly transformative power of AI-powered analytics.
And a crucial common thread uniting all these technologies, something we really need to grasp, is that their rapid deployment has consistently outpaced the development of any meaningful legal and ethical safeguards. What we've witnessed is a true land rush dynamic. A land rush? Yeah. The technology is adopted and integrated into widespread use long before public policy discussions, robust legal frameworks, or deep ethical considerations have had a chance to catch up. In this rush, unfortunately, privacy is almost always an afterthought. Build it first, ask questions later.
Okay, let's start with social media intelligence then. SOCMINT. It sounds a bit like something straight out of a spy novel, honestly. What exactly is SOCMINT, and how have government and law enforcement agencies essentially transformed the digital public square places like Twitter, Facebook, etc. into this vast, searchable field of surveillance?
You're right. Spy novel isn't far off the mark sometimes. Government and law enforcement agencies no longer view social media platforms as just casual communication channels. Not anymore. They've officially reclassified them as a critical source of real-time intelligence. That's the key phrase. SOCMINT, social media intelligence, involves the systematic monitoring and analysis of these platforms for a wide array of purposes, everything from routine criminal investigations to high-level national security threat detection. This has, as you put it, effectively transformed the entire digital public square into a vast, continuously updated, and highly searchable field of surveillance, making every public post, comment, interaction a potential data point for analysis.
So anything you post publicly could be scooped up.
Potentially, yes. And to meet this demand from agencies, a sophisticated commercial market has emerged, offering powerful tools far more advanced than just doing a simple keyword search on Twitter. Think of platforms like Horizon Investigate, Caseware, Media Sonar, Digital Stakeout. These are company names.
Tools specifically for law enforcement.
Yes, specifically designed for law enforcement and government use. They're capable of pulling data from hundreds of online sources, not just the big ones. Major social networks, sure, but also niche forums, specialized blogs, various other web communities, dark web sometimes. Their capabilities are incredibly extensive. They offer real-time monitoring of online activities, allowing authorities to track events like protests or incidents as they unfold.
Wow, real time.
And beyond simple data aggregation, they incorporate advanced analytical features, such as sentiment analysis gauging public mood, emotional tone towards a topic or policy, entity recognition identifying key individuals, organizations, or concepts within huge data sets, and link analysis meticulously mapping relationships and networks between different users online. Who's talking to whom?
So it's not just finding keywords, it's understanding relationships and feelings.
Exactly. And many of these systems are powered by artificial intelligence, which significantly enhances their capabilities. AI can automatically detect complex patterns, flag potentially threatening language based on pre-trained models, and intelligently prioritize alerts for human analysts, helping them cut through the overwhelming volume of data. You can't read everything. Automated alerts can be finely configured based on predefined keywords, specific geographic locations, or particular user activities, enabling a rapid response to perceived threats or emerging situations. One of the most powerful and frankly concerning features, however, is identity resolution.
Identity resolution, what's that?
That helps investigators unmask hidden or anonymous online personas. By connecting disparate digital footprints across multiple platforms, maybe a forum handle, a Twitter account, an email address back to real-world identities, effectively stripping away any attempts at online anonymity, finding the person behind the screen name.
That sounds incredibly comprehensive and potentially quite chilling. The stated applications for SOC MINTs seem remarkably broad, too, extending far beyond just traditional criminal investigations. What are some of these broader uses we're seeing?
Oh, the stated applications are indeed expansive. You're right. Law enforcement agencies use SOC MINT for traditional criminal investigations, sure, collecting evidence, tracking suspects. On a broader scale, it's a key tool for national security and counterterrorism efforts. Agencies actively looking for early indicators of radicalization or operational planning among individuals or groups online, but its use cases extend significantly into the civil sphere as well. It's not just crime and terror.
How so, in the civil sphere?
Well, government agencies are deploying SOC and MINT to gauge public reaction to proposed policies. See how a new law is landing? To manage responses to crises like natural disasters or public health emergencies, monitor rumors, direct resources, and even to monitor elections for foreign disinformation campaigns, trying to spot interference. For instance, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, actively monitored social media platforms during the 2020 election period, specifically looking to identify and disrupt efforts aimed at eroding voter trust or spreading misinformation.
Okay, so monitoring public opinion, crisis management, election security, that's a wide net.
It is. And what's really striking here and deeply concerning are the profound implications this pervasive monitoring has for civil liberties. The very knowledge that one's online speech and associations are being systematically monitored by authorities can create a powerful chilling effect on free expression and assembly.
The chilling effect. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. It means individuals may self-censor. They might choose to refrain from expressing controversial opinions, even perfectly legal ones. They might not search for sensitive information online or hesitate before joining activist groups or attending protests. Why? For fear of being flagged by a government algorithm, fear of appearing on some list, or just attracting unwanted scrutiny.
So people quiet down because they feel watched.
Exactly. In this sense, the chilling effect isn't an unintended bug of the system. You could argue it's actually a functional feature. When governments possess and utilize these tools to monitor public sentiment and identify dissent, SOC MINT truly morphs into a tool of social control, capable of subtly modifying behavior and suppressing speech, often without a single arrest ever needing to be made. It's about shaping public discourse through silent observation, through the possibility of being watched.
Wow. Controlling behavior without direct action. That's powerful. Okay, now let's move to facial recognition technology, FRT. This truly represents one of the most controversial frontiers in modern surveillance, doesn't it? Many of us use it every day, maybe to unlock our phones, but its deployment by government entities, especially in public spaces, that raises very profound questions. How does it work exactly, and what are the claimed benefits that proponents, particularly in law enforcement, argue for?
Right, FRT is definitely a hot-button issue. At its core, facial recognition technology works by comparing a face captured in a photograph or video footage against a vast database of known individuals to find a probable match. It maps and stores unique facial features, the distance between your eyes, the shape of your nose, creating a digital face print. That face print can then be used for identification or verification. Is this person who they claim to be? Or who is this unknown person?
So it maps your face and compares it to a database.
Essentially, yes. Now, proponents of FRT, especially within law enforcement, argue that it's an invaluable tool. They claim it creates investigative efficiencies, helps them solve crimes faster. They say it can provide crucial leads that might not otherwise exist, allowing them to identify criminal suspects faster and with fewer policing resources, saving time and money. Beyond policing, other potential benefits are often cited. Things like speeding up identification processes at airports, border control, maybe large stadiums, enhancing the safety of ride-sharing services by verifying drivers' or passengers' identities, and even helping to locate vulnerable missing persons like young children or individuals with dementia who might wander off.
Okay, so efficiency, security, finding missing people, those are the arguments for it. But these purported benefits seem clearly overshadowed, in the public debate at least, by significant and well-documented risks. One of the most pressing concerns, and it's a huge one, is the technology's inherent bias and inaccuracy. We've seen landmark studies on this, haven't we? Can you dive into that issue of bias and its very real-world consequences?
Absolutely. The issue of bias and inaccuracy is arguably the most critical flaw, and it's deeply concerning. Numerous studies, including major ones by government bodies like NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, have unequivocally shown that FRT systems exhibit significant racial, gender, and even age biases.
So they don't work equally well for everyone.
Not even close. This isn't just a minor glitch. It's often a direct result of the unrepresentative and frequently skewed data sets on which these algorithms are trained. If the training data mostly contains faces of one demographic group, the system gets really good at recognizing them, but performs poorly on others. That landmark NIST study, for example, found that many leading facial recognition algorithms had significantly higher rates of false positives, meaning they incorrectly identified someone for Asian, Black, and Native American faces compared to white faces.
Higher false positives for minority groups.
Yes. And critically, these disparities were most acute for Black women. They consistently show the highest rates of misidentification in many tests, putting them at the highest risk of being misidentified and falsely accused of a crime they didn't commit. And these are not theoretical risks. This isn't just numbers on a page. Misidentification can lead to devastating real-world consequences, including wrongful arrests, wrongful interrogations, even potentially wrongful convictions for innocent individuals. It's not just a statistic, it's someone's life turned upside down.
That's horrifying. Being arrested because an algorithm made a mistake.
It is. And beyond the issue of inaccuracy and bias, FRT poses a fundamental threat to individual privacy and anonymity, especially in public spaces. Its deployment, particularly when connected to vast networks of CCTV cameras, which are everywhere now, enables the mass, indiscriminate tracking of people's movements, their associations, their participation in public life. This means everything from attending a political rally to visiting a sensitive location like a health clinic or a place of worship could be monitored, recorded, and logged without your knowledge or consent. This creates the very real potential for a society of constant automated surveillance, a digital panopticon, a scenario that fundamentally alters the relationship between the individual and the state. It strips away the very concept of public anonymity, which is arguably a cornerstone of free societies. The ability to just be unobserved.
Yeah, the idea that you can just walk down the street without being identified and tracked, that seems to be eroding. And what's especially troubling is that this technological creep seems to have occurred in a near-total regulatory vacuum. You mentioned the land rush earlier. It feels like FRT became widespread before public policy discussions even really had a chance to occur. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. FRT truly became widespread, adopted by police departments, integrated into various systems, before meaningful public policy discussions could even begin in many communities across the country. The tech moved faster than the debate. And the ethical questions surrounding the very data that trains and operates these systems are profound. Often, the massive databases used for comparison are compiled without the knowledge or explicit consent of the individuals whose faces are included.
Where do they get the images from?
Images are frequently scraped from public websites, social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, even Flickr or news sites, sometimes mugshot databases, raising serious moral and ethical questions about the use of a person's likeness without their permission for such powerful and potentially invasive technology. Is your online photo fair game for a police database?
That's a huge question. And have we seen any pushback, any efforts to control it?
Yes, thankfully. In response to these grave concerns, we have seen some crucial local efforts, grassroots pushback. Several cities, including places like San Francisco, Oakland, Boston, Seattle, have taken a lead by either banning or severely restricting the use of FRT by their police departments and other government agencies, saying no or not yet. Some states have also passed laws limiting its use, for example, banning its integration with police body cameras, recognizing the inherent risks of real-time identification in volatile situations. However, despite these localized efforts and growing public concern, the technology continues to expand in other areas. It's not a universal trend.
So some places are banning it, others are adopting it more.
Exactly. Police departments in major cities like London, Detroit, New York City, Chicago, are actively using FRT, sometimes for live, real-time surveillance of public spaces, often integrating footage from both public and private camera systems like business security cameras or doorbell cams, really pushing the boundaries of what's technologically possible and, many argue, what should be permissible in a free society. The debate is far from over.
It certainly seems that way. Okay, so this brings us to the ultimate evolution, perhaps, of this kind of surveillance. AI-powered surveillance. This isn't just about recording anymore, is it? You said it's a paradigm shift from passive recording to active automated analysis. How exactly do AI systems interpret what they see, identify patterns, and make judgments? And how does this integrate with existing infrastructure, like all those cameras already out there?
Right. The integration of artificial intelligence into surveillance systems truly marks that profound paradigm shift. It's a game changer. We're moving beyond just passive recording storing footage for later review to active automated analysis in real time. AI-enhanced systems are designed to go far beyond simply capturing footage. They utilize complex algorithms, often deep learning models, to interpret what they're seeing, to identify intricate patterns in behavior over time, and critically, to make judgments about human activity. Is this normal? Is this suspicious? This effectively automates the act of suspicion. The machine flags things for attention.
Automates suspicion, that's a powerful phrase.
It is. And what's more, these technologies are often designed to integrate seamlessly with existing camera infrastructure. This means they can transform a vast network of standard IP cameras, the kind you see on buildings to traffic lights everywhere, into a unified, intelligent monitoring system, often without requiring a complete, costly hardware overhaul. It's like upgrading the brain behind the existing eyes.
So, smartening up the cameras we already have, what can these AI systems actually do? What are their capabilities?
The capabilities are incredibly extensive and rapidly evolving. At a foundational level, they employ machine vision to accurately recognize and classify objects, humans, and vehicles within a scene. Is that a person, a car, a backpack? More advanced systems are trained to detect specific threats in real time, such as the presence of a weapon, maybe a firearm, even if it's partially concealed. They can also be programmed to identify potential medical emergencies by detecting a person-down event, intelligently distinguishing, hopefully, between a genuine collapse and someone simply sitting or lying down casually.
So threat detection, medical alerts, what else?
Perhaps their most transformative capability is behavioral analysis and what's called anomaly detection. Think of it like this. The AI becomes a sort of digital observer. It watches a specific environment, a school campus, a factory floor, a busy public plaza, long enough to learn what normal patterns of activity look like there.
Learning the baseline.
Exactly. It does this by observing characteristics like movement speed, object size, crowd density over time, establishing that baseline. After this learning period, the system can automatically flag any significant deviations from that established norm as a potential security concern, something out of the ordinary. This could include recognizing aggressive behavior unfolding based on movement patterns, identifying unusual crowd formations that might precede a disturbance, like people suddenly running, flagging individuals who are loitering suspiciously in a sensitive area for too long, or detecting unauthorized access attempts, like someone trying to climb a fence. It's not thinking someone is suspicious in a human sense, but its programming makes that deviation look suspicious to the system, triggering an alert for human review.
And the touted advantage of these systems is pretty clear.
Sure.
Proactive, 24/7 vigilance, right. Unlike fatigued human operators who can only watch so many screens for so long before their attention inevitably wanes, AI supposedly analyzes every frame continuously, allowing for proactive rather than reactive responses. It sounds like the promise is an unblinking eye that never gets tired.
That's precisely the advantage proponents highlight, yes. Human security operators are notoriously prone to attention fatigue. Studies have shown they can miss the vast majority of relevant activity on camera feeds after only, say, 20 minutes of continuous monitoring. It's just human nature. An AI system, by contrast, analyzes every single frame from every camera feed continuously, 24/7 around the clock. This allows security personnel, in theory, to be alerted to potential threats or incidents as they emerge, enabling a truly proactive response rather than merely a reactive one after something bad has already happened. The promise is indeed a constant, unblinking eye that never tires, never looks away.
But this raises an important question, or several, really. What about the profound ethical challenges that come with this automation of suspicion? You mentioned bias before with FRT. Does that apply here too?
Absolutely, and perhaps even more profoundly. The ethical challenges are immense. As organizations like the Brennan Center for Justice have warned, AI tools are trained on vast amounts of data. And if that data reflects existing societal biases in who gets arrested, biases in how different behaviors are perceived, the AI will inevitably learn, encode, and amplify those very biases. It learns our flaws.
So biased data in, biased decisions out.
Precisely. The result is often discriminatory outcomes, where these systems disproportionately flag individuals from marginalized communities, leading to potentially erroneous and discriminatory decisions about who warrants attention, who gets stopped, who gets labeled a security risk. It's a bit like being judged by a machine that won't show its work, isn't it? You know you've been flagged, but good luck finding out why the algorithm singled you out or challenging that decision.
Right, the lack of transparency.
Exactly. Compounding this problem is what's often referred to as the black box problem. Many AI systems, especially deep learning models, are so complex that their internal decision-making processes can be incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible, for humans to understand or scrutinize. We don't know how it reached the conclusion. This lack of transparency makes it nearly impossible to hold the system or its creators and users accountable for biased or incorrect outcomes, thereby undermining fundamental pillars of justice and due process, like the right to understand the evidence against you or appeal a decision. How do you appeal a black box?
That's a deeply troubling aspect. It really brings us to a crucial point we need to underscore. The surveillance ecosystem we've been describing. It doesn't affect everyone equally, does it? It seems to disproportionately burden those who are already marginalized, whether by race, religion, immigration status, political beliefs. It almost feels like it's baked into the system.
That's absolutely correct. And it's not an accident. Modern surveillance, far from being some kind of neutral, objective technological tool, is deeply connected to a long, well-documented, and deeply rooted historical practice of discriminatory government monitoring in the United States and elsewhere. It's essentially a continuation, albeit with powerful new technologies, of past patterns of targeting specific groups, just now supercharged by digital capabilities, by AI, by mass data collection.
Can you give us some historical context for this disproportionate targeting? Because it truly feels like a pattern repeating itself over time, just with new tools.
Indeed, it's a deeply entrenched pattern, sadly. The disproportionate surveillance of marginalized communities is by no means a new phenomenon in the United States. It has deep roots. For decades, the government has historically wielded its surveillance powers to monitor and control groups it perceived as threats, often threats to the existing social and political order. Understanding this history is essential context for understanding the stakes of modern surveillance, because today's advanced technologies are often deployed along precisely the same discriminatory lines drawn in the past. History rhymes, as they say.
So what are some key examples?
Well, one of the most notorious examples is the FBI's counterintelligence program, famously known as COINTELPRO. This operated from the mid-1950s into the 1970s. COINTELPRO involved illegal covert operations, systematic surveillance, infiltration by informants, psychological warfare, harassment, sometimes violence, specifically designed to discredit, disrupt, and neutralize a wide range of domestic political organizations.
And who are they targeting?
Their targets were not foreign spies. They were American citizens, members of the civil rights movement, Black nationalist organizations, the American Indian movement, Puerto Rican independence groups, anti-Vietnam War protesters, women's rights movements, socialist groups, basically anyone challenging the status quo. Civil rights leaders as iconic as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were subjected to intense surveillance, including wiretaps that collected intimate details of their personal lives, completely unrelated to any criminal activity, used purely for harassment and discrediting. It's a chilling reminder of how far government overreach can go when unchecked.
COINTELPRO is a stark example. Are there others?
Ah, yes. This disturbing pattern of targeting specific ethnic and racial groups is a recurring theme. Consider the grim example during World War II. The U.S. government systematically monitored the Japanese-American community for years before Pearl Harbor. They accessed private bank accounts, intercepted communications, and ultimately used seemingly benign data, like U.S. Census Bureau records, to locate and forcibly detain 120,000 people, mostly American citizens, in desolate internment camps for years, based purely on their ancestry. This historical precedent offers a chilling demonstration of how data collected for what might appear to be administrative purposes can be weaponized against an entire community in the name of national security.
Using census data for internment? That's terrifying.
It is. And sadly, in the post-9/11 era, these historical patterns have unfortunately been replicated and even amplified, now with new justifications, the war on terror and, critically, new digital technologies. Muslim Americans, for instance, have been systematically targeted, subjected to heightened surveillance, discriminatory screening at airports, watch listing, infiltration of mosques and community centers. The New York Police Department, the NYPD, engaged in a widespread program, later disbanded after lawsuits, of mapping and surveilling Muslim communities, even infiltrating mosques and student groups with undercover officers and informants, all without any specific evidence of wrongdoing whatsoever, just based on religion.
Or just blanket surveillance of a community.
Exactly. And more recently, we've seen reports and evidence. In the wake of widespread calls for racial justice following the murder of George Floyd and other incidents, law enforcement agencies have deployed a variety of surveillance technologies, including facial recognition and social media monitoring, to monitor and track activists involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and other anti-racism protests, documenting dissent. This consistent, targeted surveillance serves a very clear purpose, historically and today: to mark entire communities as inherently suspect, thereby perpetuating cycles of marginalization and fear, and fundamentally eroding the trust between these communities and the government that is supposed to serve and protect them.
So what does this all mean? It truly sounds like a deeply ingrained pattern of marking entire communities as inherently suspect. And this suspicion is then used to justify even more surveillance, creating a vicious cycle.
Precisely. It becomes self-justifying.
And here's where it really gets fascinating, but also incredibly troubling, maybe even more so. Because AI and machine learning are adding this dangerous new dimension to this long, problematic history we just outlined. We've talked about algorithmic bias before, but how exactly does this technology learn, automate, and amplify biases from historical data, essentially making discriminatory outcomes inherently built into the system, as one source put it?
You've precisely identified the new, dangerous dimension here. It's automation and amplification at scale.
Yeah.
Modern technologies, particularly AI and machine learning, are absolutely not neutral tools. They are mirrors reflecting the data they're fed. They're trained on vast data sets, and if that historical data reflects existing societal biases, whether from biased policing patterns leading to skewed arrest data, historical discrimination in housing resulting in segregated location data, or other systemic inequities captured in the numbers, then the technology will learn those biases. It will then automate those biases in its decision-making and inevitably amplify them because it applies them consistently and rapidly across vast populations.
So the AI learns our prejudices.
It learns the patterns in the data, and if those patterns reflect prejudice, then yes, it learns prejudice. This phenomenon, often termed algorithmic racism or algorithmic bias more broadly, means that discriminatory outcomes are not just occasional errors or glitches. They are, as our sources state, inherently built into the system from start to finish. The system isn't just making mistakes. It's replicating and entrenching historical injustice at scale, often under a veneer of technological objectivity.
Oh, we see this clearly with facial recognition, right?
Absolutely. The consequences are starkly evident in the application of facial recognition technology. As we discussed earlier, FRT systems have been consistently shown to have significantly higher error rates when attempting to identify people of color, especially Black women. This fundamental technological flaw puts these individuals at a much greater risk of being falsely matched to a criminal suspect, with potentially devastating and life-altering consequences: wrongful arrest, loss of job, reputational damage. The use of these flawed tools by law enforcement effectively outsources a critical component of policing identification to a biased algorithm, which can lend a false veneer of scientific objectivity to what are, in effect, deeply discriminatory practices. It
Yeah.
looks like science, but it's biased.
Hiding bias behind complexity.
Exactly. And this technological reinforcement of inequity extends significantly to other areas too, like predictive policing systems.
Ah, yes, predictive policing. How does bias play out there?
These systems use historical crime data to forecast where future crimes are likely to occur, trying to help departments deploy resources more efficiently, proactively. Sounds good on paper. However, because historical crime data often reflects biased policing patterns, meaning certain neighborhoods, typically low-income communities and communities of color, were historically more heavily patrolled, leading to more arrests for minor offenses like drug possession or loitering. The algorithms trained on this data tend to direct police back to those very same communities.
So it tells them to police where they've always policed.
Essentially, yes. This creates a deeply troubling, self-fulfilling prophecy, or a vicious cycle. Increased police presence in marginalized communities leads to more arrests for minor offenses, which in turn generates more data points showing higher crime rates in that area, which then justifies the algorithm continuing to direct even more police resources there. The surveillance itself generates the rationale for its own continuation and expansion, effectively locking communities of color into a relentless feedback loop of heightened scrutiny and criminalization, regardless of actual serious crime rates compared to other areas that might be less policed.
That's a terrifying feedback loop. The system feeds itself. And this dynamic isn't limited to law enforcement, is it? Our sources mention bias worsening disparities in healthcare and discrimination in housing, employment, credit.
That's absolutely right. The scope of algorithmic bias extends far beyond direct law enforcement applications. It's seeping into many critical areas of life. For instance, algorithmic bias has been found to exacerbate existing inequities in healthcare access and outcomes. Algorithms used for resource allocation might deprioritize certain groups based on historical spending patterns, which themselves reflect disparities. Similarly, online platforms, by leveraging vast quantities of consumer data, have been found to engage in discriminatory practices related to opportunities for housing, employment, and credit, often by subtly or overtly excluding certain demographic groups from seeing specific advertisements or offers for jobs, apartments, or loans based on proxies for race or gender inferred from their data. Digital redlining, essentially.
Digital redlining. Wow. There's a specific, really chilling example from our sources about a company called Odin Intelligence. Can you tell us about that one?
Yes. The Odin intelligence example is particularly stark and illustrates how surveillance technology can be deployed against society's most vulnerable populations. Odin Intelligence provides technology to law enforcement agencies that maintains a database specifically of individuals experiencing homelessness. This system uses facial recognition, reportedly, to track these individuals across a city or region. And, crucially, it allows law enforcement to quickly access sensitive personal information about them. Things like their arrest history, shelter stays, known associates, maybe even health information or housing status. This is a stark example of how surveillance technology is not being used here to help or support a vulnerable population, provide services, but rather to manage and control them, arguably further deepening their marginalization and making it harder for them to escape homelessness. It turns a complex social issue into a surveillance and control problem.
Treating homelessness like a crime to be managed through tracking. That's deeply disturbing. Okay, so beyond the direct harms of bias, targeting, and discriminatory outcomes, there's the long shadow that surveillance casts over fundamental democratic rights. We've talked about this before, but this pervasive monitoring has a profound, chilling effect on free speech. Can you elaborate on this concept and why it's so significant for democracy?
The chilling effect is incredibly significant because it quietly, subtly undermines the very foundation of a democratic society, which relies on open discourse and dissent. It works like this. When individuals know, or even just suspect, that their online activities, their public movements, their personal associations are being systematically monitored by the government, they become hesitant. They may become hesitant to express controversial opinions, even if those opinions are entirely lawful and constitutionally protected. They think twice before posting. They might refrain from searching for sensitive information online, maybe about health or politics or religion, fearing how that search history might be interpreted. Or they might hesitate before joining political organizations, donating to certain causes, or attending protests, all for fear of being flagged by a surveillance system, fear of ending up on some government watch list, or simply attracting unwanted scrutiny to themselves, their families, their jobs.
So it makes people afraid to speak out or associate freely.
Exactly. And this chilling effect is particularly acute for activists, journalists, lawyers, and protesters. People whose work often inherently involves challenging power, expressing dissent, or dealing with sensitive information. The use of covert surveillance tools to monitor protests, for instance, serves to actively disrupt organizing efforts and directly intimidate participants. People might not show up if they know they're being filmed and identified. When law enforcement agencies use sophisticated social media monitoring tools like SOC-M&E we discussed to identify protest organizers and participants, it sends a very clear and unambiguous message that dissent itself is being watched, that pushing back is risky. This can deter people from engaging in lawful assembly and public protest, which are absolutely cornerstone rights in a healthy, functioning democracy. The Brennan Center for Justice has explicitly warned about this, stating that government social media monitoring is used not just to find genuine threats, but critically also to target dissent.
Targeting dissent itself, not just illegal activity. So what does this all mean for a healthy democracy? Because this impact seems to go beyond mere self-censorship by individuals. It sounds like it works to ostracize and delegitimize entire communities or movements.
That's a crucial connection to make. If we connect this chilling effect to the bigger picture of targeted surveillance, it means that government monitoring, particularly when applied disproportionately against certain groups, doesn't just silence individual voices one by one. It effectively marks an individual or community as deviant before the evidence that this monitoring is intended to collect ever surfaces.
Guilty until proven innocent, based on who you are or what you believe.
In a way, yes. There is an inherent presumption of wrongdoing that comes with being targeted for pervasive surveillance. And this makes it incredibly difficult for members of that group, whether it's a religious minority, an ethnic group, or political movement, to participate fully and freely in social and political life. It undermines their ability to speak out against injustice and advocate for change. Precisely because the very act of speaking out, of organizing, of advocating, has been pre-framed by the surveillance as suspicious, potentially even subversive or dangerous. In this insidious way, surveillance becomes a powerful tool for maintaining the status quo, effectively silencing critical voices and preventing marginalized communities from effectively challenging the systems that may oppress them. It creates a society where conformity is subtly incentivized and dissent is quietly discouraged, often without needing a single visible act of overt repression. The surveillance itself does the work.
Wow. A tool for maintaining the status quo by chilling dissent. That's a lot to take in. Okay, so all of these technological advancements and their uses are happening within a legal and ethical environment that seems completely, utterly ill-equipped to handle them. It really does feel like trying to regulate supersonic jets with, horse and buggy laws. Is that a fair assessment?
That's such an apt analogy. I think it really captures the situation well. The rapid expansion of this surveillance ecosystem, both corporate and state, has indeed occurred within a legal and ethical environment that is profoundly unprepared for its complexities and potential harms. The legal frameworks that are supposed to govern data privacy are, especially in the U.S., fragmented. They're inconsistent, and too often, as evidence suggests, they are overtly influenced by the very industries they are meant to regulate. Lobbying has a huge impact. Simultaneously, foundational ethical principles that once guided data practices, concepts like meaningful informed consent, purpose limitation, data minimization, have been stretched to their absolute breaking point, arguably collapsing under the sheer scale and opacity of modern technology. They just don't fit the current reality very well.
This brings us to a stark contrast, doesn't it, in how privacy is approached legally around the world. There's the U.S. patchwork approach versus the EU's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Can you introduce this fundamental difference for us? Because they seem worlds apart.
They really are quite different fundamentally. The global landscape of data privacy law is indeed dominated by these two contrasting models. On one side, you have the fragmented, sector-specific approach characteristic of the United States. Lots of different laws for different things. On the other, there's the comprehensive, rights-based framework embodied by the European Union's GDPR, one big law covering almost everything. And this divergence isn't merely structural, like how the laws are organized. It reflects a deep philosophical divide in how privacy itself is conceptualized and valued within legal systems, what privacy means.
Okay, so let's unpack the U.S. approach first, the patchwork.
Right. In the United States, there is a distinct and often lamented lack of a single comprehensive federal privacy law that covers all types of personal data. Instead, the U.S. relies on what is frequently and accurately described as a complex patchwork of federal, state, and even local laws. At the federal level, the existing laws are generally vertical, meaning they apply only to specific sectors of the economy or specific types of data. Key examples include HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act for medical records, You probably get Hype-I forms at the doctor's office. There's GLBA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act for financial information held by banks and financial institutions, and COPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act for data collected online from children under 13. While these laws provide important protections within their narrow domains, they leave vast areas of data collection and processing, like general web browsing, social media use, location data outside specific contexts, entirely unregulated at the federal level. Huge gaps.
So specific rules for health, finance, kids, but not much else federally.
Largely, yes. And in this significant absence of federal leadership, individual states have increasingly begun to step into the void, filling the gap. This movement has been powerfully led by the passage of the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, back in 2018, which was later amended and expanded by the CPRA. Since then, numerous other states, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and more, have followed with their own comprehensive privacy laws, creating a complicated, often inconsistent, and overlapping compliance environment for businesses that operate nationwide. It's hard for companies to navigate 50 different state rules.
Okay, so that's the U.S. patchwork. How does the EU's GDPR contrast with that?
It's a stark contrast. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which took effect in 2018 as well, is what we call a horizontal law. This means it's one big, comprehensive privacy rulebook that applies horizontally across the board, across the entire EU. It provides a single, unified framework for data protection that applies to virtually all processing of personal data, regardless of the sector. Right. One rule to rule them all, essentially. The GDPR is built on a robust foundation of core principles. These are baked right in. Principles like lawfulness, fairness, and transparency in data processing. You have to tell people what you're doing and have a legal reason. Strict purpose limitation, meaning data, can generally only be collected and used for the specific, legitimate purpose you told the person about initially. No reusing it for something totally different later without consent. Data immunization mandating that you should only collect the data that is strictly necessary for that stated purpose. Don't grab everything just in case. And comprehensive accountability for those who handle the data controllers and processors. They are responsible for complying.
So clear principles. Does it give rights to individuals, too?
Absolutely. Crucially, the GDPR grants individuals a strong set of enforceable rights regarding their own data. These include the right to access their data, see what companies have on them, the right to data portability, take their data with them to another service, the right to rectification, correct inaccurate data, and a clear right to erasure, often referred to popularly as the right to be forgotten, allowing individuals to request deletion of their data under certain circumstances. A really significant aspect of the GDPR is also its extraterritorial reach.
Meaning it applies outside the EU?
Yes, it applies to any company worldwide, regardless of where that company is based, if they offer goods or services to people in the EU, or if they monitor the behavior of people in the EU, like through website tracking. So U.S. companies have to comply if they deal with Europeans. Its enforcement mechanism is also famously robust. This has teeth, with the potential for administrative fines up to 20 million euros, or a staggering 4% of a company's total global annual revenue from the preceding year, whichever is higher.
4% of global revenue. That could be billions for big tech companies.
Exactly. It creates a very powerful financial incentive for compliance, even for the largest players.
So what does this all really mean, beyond the structure? It sounds like a fundamental difference in philosophy, not just in how the regulations are written. Can you explain that underlying philosophical gap for us?
You've hit on the absolute crux of the matter there. This comparison between the U.S. and EU frameworks isn't just about technical legal differences. It reveals a profound underlying philosophical gap in how privacy is viewed. The GDPR is fundamentally conceived, designed, and interpreted as a human rights instrument. That's its starting point. It starts from the premise that privacy is a fundamental human right, a core entitlement articulated in European charters. Its principles are meticulously designed to protect that right by default and by law. Privacy first. The U.S. framework, on the other hand, historically and currently, is primarily rooted in a consumer protection and commercial regulation tradition. Its design is largely reactive. It's often intended to prevent specific, tangible harms, things like financial fraud, identity theft, unfair or deceptive trade practices, or to regulate commercial transactions fairly. It is not fundamentally designed, for the most part, to protect the more abstract, dignitary right to privacy itself, or to address the broader societal implications of pervasive surveillance. This philosophical difference critically explains why the U.S. system, this patchwork, is so poorly suited to address the more nuanced, systemic harms of the modern surveillance ecosystem. Harms like the chilling effect on speech, or the perpetuation of systemic bias through algorithms. These don't fit neatly into the category of consumer fraud or easily quantifiable financial loss, and thus they frequently fall through the cracks of the American legal patchwork, remaining largely unaddressed or inadequately addressed by the existing laws.
That makes so much sense. One sees privacy as a human right, the other more as a consumer protection issue against specific harms. And looking back at our source table, it further highlights these differences between the US and EU frameworks across several core principles. Things like the legal basis for processing. You mentioned the US relies more on an opt out model for many things versus the EU's stronger emphasis on opt in or other clear legal bases. Or the consent standard itself, often an opt out default assumed in the US unless specified otherwise, versus the explicit, unambiguous opt in required for GDPR consent. And of course, the enforcement penalties we just discussed, the GDPR's massive potential fines, contrast sharply with typical US civil penalties from the FTC or state AGs. Can you briefly explain the practical impact of these key differences on the average user? Like, what does it feel like for someone living under these different systems?
Yeah, the practical impact on the average user is profound, even if it's not always immediately apparent in your daily scrolling or app usage. Let's take those points. Under the U.S. opt-out model for data processing in many contexts, outside specific areas like health or finance or sensitive data under some state laws, the default assumption is often that companies can collect and use your data unless you specifically find a way and take the action to tell them not to. This puts the burden squarely on you, the individual user. You have to actively navigate complex, often buried settings menus and dense privacy policies to try and protect yourself. It's work. For instance, you might have to dig deep into an app's settings, maybe multiple levels down, to find the switch to stop it from selling your precise location data to data brokers, assuming that switch even exists and works.
Right. The burden is on the user to find and flip the switch.
Exactly. In contrast, the EU's opt-in model for consent, which is just one of several legal bases but a key one, means companies must actively obtain your explicit, unambiguous consent before they can process your data for many purposes, especially non-essential ones like targeted advertising or tracking, or for sensitive data categories. This shifts the burden significantly to the company. They have to ask first, clearly and transparently, and you have to actively agree. This gives you more immediate upfront control. You'll often see those cookie banners or consent pop-ups when you visit EU websites. They can feel annoying, sure, but they are a direct reflection of your rights being prioritized and your explicit permission being sought.
So ask first versus assume permission until told no.
That's a good way to put it. And the consent standard itself reinforces this difference. In the U.S., for adults outside specific regulated context, opt-out is often the default. Consent might be implied by simply using the service after being shown a privacy policy, browser app, or bundled into long terms of service. Silence or inaction is often treated as agreement. GDPR, however, requires consent to be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous, demonstrated by a clear affirmative action. Clicking a specific yes button, ticking an unticked box. Silence, pre-ticked boxes, or inaction simply do not count as valid consent under GDPR. This practically means companies operating under GDPR have to work harder to justify their data collection and are generally forced to be much more transparent about exactly what data they want, why they want it, and who they'll share it with, right at the point of collection.
More transparency up front.
Generally, yes. And finally, the enforcement and penalties are where the rubber truly meets the road in terms of motivating companies. In the U.S., enforcement is fragmented between the FTC, state attorneys general, and private lawsuits under some state laws like CC-PAC-PRA. Penalties can be significant. FTC settlements can reach billions, CCPA fines up to $7,500 per intentional violation, but they're often negotiated down, may not cover all harms, and historically haven't always been seen as existentially threatening to the largest companies' core business models. GDPR's potential fines, up to that 4% of a company's global annual revenue, are designed to be so financially impactful, potentially wiping out profits, that they create a powerful structural incentive for compliance at the board level for even the largest multinational tech giants. This means companies facing GDPR are often far more proactive, investing heavily in building privacy into their systems from the start, privacy by design, knowing the financial repercussions of getting it wrong are so potentially severe. So for you, the average user. This translates to a legal framework in the EU that is fundamentally designed, at least in theory, to put your privacy rights first and give you more control by default. Whereas in the U.S., it often feels more like you're navigating a commercial marketplace where your privacy is a commodity you have to constantly fight to protect, and the law steps in mainly to prevent the most egregious harms or deceptions after the fact.
That paints a very clear picture of the philosophical and practical differences. Thank you.
Now, this weakness and fragmentation in the U.S. legal landscape, this patchwork we've talked about, our sources strongly suggest this isn't some accident of history or oversight. It's presented as the very clear result of a sustained and well-funded lobbying campaign by the technology industry. This sounds like a deliberate strategy to undermine meaningful privacy reform. Is that what the research shows?
It absolutely is. The analysis of corporate influence campaigns, particularly from watchdog groups and investigative reporting cited in our sources, has revealed a pretty sophisticated, multi-step playbook. A strategy employed consistently by the tech industry and its trade associations to undermine meaningful privacy reform at both state and federal levels, and essentially shape legislation to their advantage, preserving their data-driven business models.
A playbook. What are the steps?
Okay, so first, when momentum for a strong state privacy law begins to build, like we saw with the CCPA in California, driven initially by a ballot initiative, tech industry lobbyists often flood the legislature with their own deceptive bills, or they push for significant weakening amendments to the strong bill. These industry-backed bills often mimic the language of genuine privacy laws. They might use terms like transparency and control, but they're intentionally crafted with critical loopholes, weak definitions, broad exceptions for data use, and importantly, weak enforcement mechanisms, often preventing individuals from suing directly, for example. Essentially, as one source put it, millions are spent to replace real privacy laws with fake industry alternatives, or to water down the real ones until they're toothless. Step 1, muddy the waters, weaken the bills.
Okay, so derail or dilute strong state laws. What's next?
Step 2, once several states have inevitably passed these varied and often weakened laws that the industry itself helped shape through lobbying, the industry then pivots its messaging. They start complaining publicly about the resulting patchwork of regulations across different states. They argue, often quite loudly, that this collection of inconsistent state laws creates an unworkable compliance burden for businesses, especially small businesses. And, ironically, they claim it fails to adequately protect consumers because it's so confusing.
So they help create the patchwork, then complain about it.
Precisely. This criticism, which is often a direct consequence of their own lobbying efforts to prevent a strong, uniform standard, then sets the stage perfectly for the third and most critical step in the playbook. It's the holy grail for the tech industry: federal preemption. Preemption is a legal doctrine where if a federal law is passed covering a certain issue, it overrides or preempts all state laws on that same issue, effectively making them null and void. The industry's ultimate goal, according to this analysis, is to lobby Congress to pass a relatively weak federal privacy bill, one that looks good on the surface but lacks strong protections and enforcement. But the absolutely crucial part is that this weak federal bill must include a strong preemption clause. Such a law would not only neutralize any stronger privacy protections that states like California, Colorado, or others have already enacted, but it would also, crucially, prevent any state from passing stronger, more innovative privacy laws in the future. It locks in a low standard nationwide.
Wow. So use the state patchwork they helped create as justification for a weak federal law that wipes out the strong state laws.
That appears to be the core strategy described. And this strategy has proven highly effective over the years. Lobbyists employ tactics like overwhelming lawmakers with hundreds of amendments to bog down the legislative process for stronger bills, a death-by-a-thousand-cuts approach. And they hire armies of lobbyists, often former government officials, to exert continuous pressure on both state legislatures and Congress. To give you a sense of the scale, our sources mentioned that in 2024 alone, big tech companies pumped more than $51 million into federal lobbying efforts. $51 million. Often with the express purpose of influencing or outright thwarting the passage of privacy, competition, and online safety legislation they oppose. It's a massive investment in shaping the rules.
$51 million in lobbying. That buys a lot of influence. What's really fascinating here, though, is the disconnect you sometimes see between these aggressive private lobbying actions and what the companies often say publicly. Many of these same tech companies develop elaborate internal privacy programs. They hire chief privacy officers, they publish transparency reports. And they frequently promote their commitment to transparency and user trust, trying to bridge the consumer trust gap, as one source put it. It feels quite contradictory, doesn't it?
It absolutely appears contradictory on the surface, doesn't it? But viewed strategically, it often makes sense as part of the broader influence campaign. It's often described as a strategic maneuver, a form of preemptive defense. By publicly proclaiming their commitment to privacy and by developing these elaborate internal privacy programs, complete with governance structures, risk assessment teams, privacy engineering, even internal privacy red teams, designed to proactively test their own systems for flaws. Companies aim to project an image of responsible self-governance. Look, we care. We're handling this internally.
So it's partly PR.
It's certainly partly PR, but it's strategic PR. This public posture is designed to reassure consumers, yes, but also crucially to persuade lawmakers and regulators that strict, legally binding external regulation is unnecessary or should be less prescriptive. The implicit message is, the industry is already handling it responsibly. Trust us, we don't need rigid new laws. End quote. These internal initiatives and public statements can function as a kind of public relations shield, designed to forestall the very government oversight and robust regulation that they are simultaneously spending millions of dollars to defeat behind the closed doors of legislative offices. It's about controlling the narrative, demonstrating sufficient good faith to avoid more stringent legal requirements, while fighting those requirements tooth and nail in the background.
That's a fascinating, if somewhat cynical, take on it. Project responsibility to avoid accountability. Okay, so the legal landscape is fragmented and influenced. But it's not just the laws that are failing us here, is it? Our sources argue that traditional ethical principles, the very bedrock of how we thought about data ethics, are also collapsing under the sheer weight of modern tech's scale and opacity. It feels like the foundations themselves are crumbling beneath us.
That's precisely the case, and it's a deeply concerning development. The rapid technological and legal shifts of the past 2 decades, driven by the rise of surveillance capitalism and big data, have placed immense, perhaps unbearable strain on the traditional ethical principles that once seemed sufficient to govern data practices. Many core concepts that are still routinely invoked in privacy policies, ethical guidelines, and academic discussions have, frankly, become functionally obsolete, or at least severely challenged, in the face of the surveillance ecosystem's scale, complexity, and business imperatives.
Functionally obsolete. Which principles are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with the big one, informed consent. This has long been considered the absolute cornerstone of ethical data collection and processing, the bedrock principle. It requires that individuals have genuine autonomy, the ability to understand and meaningfully control how their personal data is collected, used, and shared. They need to know what they're agreeing to. However, given the sheer volume, the variety, the complexity, and the dynamic, ever-changing nature of data collected by just a single online platform or service today, it is practically impossible for any average user to be truly informed in any meaningful sense.
Because the privacy policies are so long and complicated.
Exactly. Privacy policies are notoriously lengthy, filled with dense legal jargon, deliberately opaque sometimes, and constantly subject to change, often with little notice. Who reads them all? Who understands them all? Furthermore, the black box nature of advanced AI systems means that even the companies themselves may not be able to fully predict or explain how your data will be used to make future, complex decisions or inferences about you. In this context, clicking that ubiquitous I agree button is not a moment of meaningful consent or thoughtful choice based on understanding. It has become, effectively, as one source put it, an act of capitulation, a non-negotiable prerequisite simply to participate in modern digital life, to access essential services, communication tools, information. You click or you're excluded. That's not a real choice.
An act of capitulation. Yeah, that resonates. What other principles are struggling?
The related principles of purpose limitation and data minimization are also in direct, perhaps irreconcilable, conflict with the prevailing business model of the tech industry. These ethical tenets hold that data should only be collected for a specific, legitimate, and clearly defined purpose stated up front, and that the collection itself should be limited, minimized, to only the data that is strictly necessary and relevant for achieving that specific purpose. Collect only what you truly need for the task at hand. However, the core economic logic of surveillance capitalism drives companies in exactly the opposite direction. It incentivizes them to collect literally everything possible, every click, every view, every location point, every connection, and to retain it indefinitely.
Why collect everything?
Because the data's future value is inherently unknown and potentially limitless. Data that seems irrelevant or trivial today might become the key ingredient for training the next generation AI model tomorrow. Or it might reveal an unforeseen advertising segment or provide a competitive advantage down the line. Hoard it now, figure out how to monetize it later. This dominant model of maximalist collect everything just in case data collection is fundamentally incompatible with the ethical principles of limiting collection to a specific purpose and minimizing the amount collected. The business model demands the opposite of the ethics.
So ethics says collect less, business says collect more.
Direct conflict. A fundamental conflict. And finally, the principle of fairness and non-discrimination is being actively, demonstrably violated by many of the technologies being deployed, despite ethical guidelines calling for fairness. Ethical AI development explicitly demands the avoidance of unfair bias or discriminatory outcomes. That's a core goal in the field now. Yet, as we established in our previous discussion on algorithmic bias and FRT, the reality is that many of the AI and facial recognition systems currently in widespread use are demonstrably biased. They don't treat everyone fairly. They learn, encode, and amplify existing societal inequities against marginalized communities based on race, gender, age, and other characteristics. The promise of technological fairness and objectivity has, in practice, often given way to the harsh reality of widespread technological discrimination baked right into the code. And compounding this profound ethical failure is the pervasive lack of transparency and accountability in these opaque black box systems, which makes it incredibly difficult, often impossible, for individuals harmed by biased algorithms to even understand how they have been harmed, let alone seek effective redress, correction, or compensation for those harms. The system is biased, and you can't even see why or fight back effectively.
It really feels like the ethical guardrails we thought we had are just not holding up to the reality of this technology and its business models. But this trajectory, this rather grim picture we've painted of a surveillance ecosystem eroding our fundamental rights and exacerbating inequality, it's not inevitable, is it? Our sources emphasize this. It's the direct result of specific policy choices, specific business models, and specific technological designs that absolutely can be challenged and changed. So it clearly demands a systemic, multi-pronged effort if we want to change course. It's not just one fix.
You're absolutely right, and that's the crucial takeaway. This is not technologically determined. It's a result of human choices and systems we built or allowed to be built. Therefore, a single solution, whether it's one new law, one new privacy-enhancing technology, or one new corporate social responsibility policy, simply won't suffice. It won't fix the underlying structures. The problem is systemic, arising from the complex interplay of law, commerce, technology, and power. Therefore, the solutions must be equally systemic, equally comprehensive. We need a framework for reform that addresses all these interconnected layers simultaneously. Broadly, this requires concerted action on three interconnected fronts. First, robust legislative and regulatory imperatives, new rules from the government. Second, a completely new model for corporate accountability, changing how companies operate and what they're responsible for. And third, the active empowerment of individuals and civil society, bottom-up pressure and tools.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with the legislative and regulatory side. Given the fragmented patchwork in the U.S. and the challenges we've discussed, what does this all mean for what needs to happen legislatively? What are the most urgent needs for reform? What should lawmakers be focusing on right now?
The most critical and urgent need, echoed by many privacy advocates and scholars, is for robust and truly comprehensive legal reform. We need to create a new, solid foundation for data privacy and surveillance oversight in the United States. The current system is just not cutting it. A new legislative agenda must be bold, it must be forward-looking, and most importantly, it must be rights-focused, shifting away from the weaker consumer protection model.
So what would that look like in practice? What kind of laws?
Okay, first and foremost, Congress must finally pass a comprehensive federal privacy law, a baseline for the whole country. But crucially, this cannot be the weak, industry-friendly bill riddled with loopholes and preemption that lobbyists have consistently pushed for. That would be counterproductive. Instead, it must be modeled on the rights-based principles we see in frameworks like the GDPR. It needs to unequivocally establish privacy as a fundamental right, not merely a consumer preference that can be easily traded away or opted out of. Key provisions within such a strong federal law must include making the principles of data minimization, collect only what's necessary, and purpose limitation, use it only for the stated purpose, the default legal standard for all data processing. Companies should have to justify collecting more, not the other way around. It must also require explicit opt-in consent for the processing of sensitive categories of data, things like biometric data, precise location, health information, private communications, real meaningful consent. Critically, such a law must create and adequately fund a well-resourced and empowered federal data protection agency, APA, like an EPA for data, with the authority to proactively investigate, make rules, and enforce the law with significant meaningful penalties for violations, penalties that actually deter bad behavior. And this is absolutely vital. Any federal law must set a strong floor for privacy protections nationwide. But it must explicitly not include broad preemption that prevents states from passing even stronger, more innovative laws in the future. We need to allow states to continue experimenting and leading, fostering a competitive race to the top for privacy, not locking in a mediocre federal standard. No preemption of stronger state laws.
Okay, a strong federal baseline, no preemption. What else on the legislative front? What about government surveillance itself?
Absolutely critical. Second, existing surveillance laws must be fundamentally reformed to close the dangerous loopholes that currently enable excessive or warrantless spying on Americans, often exploiting the data collected by corporations. Congress should enact meaningful reforms to controversial authorities, like Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. Specifically, reforms must explicitly end the so-called backdoor search loophole. This loophole currently allows agencies like the FBI to search through vast quantities of communications collected under Section 702 communications collected without a warrant targeting foreigners abroad, specifically looking for the communications of Americans, effectively circumventing Fourth Amendment warrant requirements. That needs to stop. The standard for any government access to the sensitive personal data of Americans, whether held by companies or collected directly, should be a warrant based on probable cause, issued by a neutral judge, aligning with core constitutional principles. No more easy shortcuts around the Fourth Amendment.
Closing loopholes, requiring warrants, makes sense. What about specific technologies like facial recognition or AI?
Yes, that's the third key area. There must be strict regulation, including potential bans for high-risk surveillance technologies. We can't let the tech run wild anymore. For particularly dangerous and inherently privacy-invasive technologies like real-time facial recognition used on the general public in public spaces, governments at federal, state, and local levels should impose immediate moratoria or, in many contexts, outright bans on their use by law enforcement, given their proven biases and profound chilling effects on freedom of and anonymity. Just say no to mass facial scanning in public. For all AI systems used in high-stakes domains like national security, law enforcement, employment, credit, housing, there must be robust, legally binding rules. These rules must govern precisely how this technology is authorized for use, how it must be rigorously tested for bias and accuracy before deployment, how its use must be transparently disclosed to the public and to individuals affected by its decisions, and how it is subject to meaningful independent oversight and auditing to ensure accountability and allow for redress. We need guardrails for AI.
So, bans or strict rules for the riskiest tech. Anything else on the government side?
Finally, yes, government oversight mechanisms themselves must be significantly strengthened and made more independent. The power, resources, and independence of critical oversight bodies, such as the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, PCLOB, which oversees counterterrorism programs, should be enhanced. We need them to bring much-needed transparency and accountability to what are often highly secret national security surveillance programs conducted by agencies like the NSA and FBI. More sunshine is needed. And at the local level, states and cities should be encouraged or required to enact laws similar to the public oversight of surveillance technology, POS acts, or ordinances that have passed in some cities. These laws require police departments and other city agencies to disclose all the surveillance technologies they currently use or intend to acquire. And crucially, they require departments to establish clear, publicly accessible use policies for each technology, subject to both public comment and, importantly, approval by the local legislative body, like the City Council, before the technology can be acquired or used. This ensures democratic control over these powerful tools at the community level.
Democratic control. That seems key. Wow, that's a comprehensive legislative agenda. Now, moving to the second area you mentioned, corporate accountability. It really sounds like relying on corporate self-regulation, voluntary codes of conduct, and those internal programs we discussed, that has proven to be a largely failed strategy, hasn't it, given everything we've discussed about lobbying and business models. So what's the new model for corporate accountability that would actually work? What would that look like in practice? How do we make companies truly responsible?
You're absolutely right. The evidence strongly suggests that relying primarily on corporate self-regulation is fundamentally inadequate. The incentives often point the other way. A new model of corporate accountability is desperately needed, one that moves far beyond voluntary compliance checklists, glossy sustainability reports, or internal programs that lack external teeth. We need a model that embeds ethical responsibilities and genuine user protection directly into the core operations, the product development lifecycle, and crucially, the legal obligations and fiduciary duties of technology companies. It needs to be structural, not cosmetic.
Okay, embedding responsibility. How do we do that? What are the mechanisms?
Well, first, the principle of privacy by design and by default, which is a cornerstone of the GDPR, but often treated more as a suggestion in the U.S., must become a mandatory, legally enforceable standard for all technology development and deployment in the U.S. This means that privacy protections cannot be an afterthought, something bolted on later in the development cycle, or just an optional setting buried deep in menus that most users never find or activate. That's not good enough. Instead, privacy and data protection must be proactively built into the fundamental architecture of products, services, and business processes from the earliest stages of their conception and design. And, critically, the most privacy-protective settings should be the default setting out of the box. Users should have to actively opt in to less privacy rather than having to navigate complex menus to opt out of invasive practices. This shifts the burden of protecting privacy from the individual user, who is often overwhelmed and lacks expertise, back onto the developer and the company who create and profit from the technology. Make privacy the easy, automatic choice.
Privacy by design and default as mandatory. That sounds powerful. What else?
Second, accountability must be rigorously verified through mandatory independent audits and impact assessments, not just internal reviews. We need external checks. Companies that develop, deploy, or sell high-risk data processing systems, particularly those involving powerful AI and machine learning for sensitive decisions, should be legally required to undergo regular, meaningful, independent third-party audits, not audits paid for and controlled entirely by the company itself. These independent audits would need the power and expertise to specifically assess their algorithms and data practices for accuracy, for security vulnerabilities, for inherent bias against protected groups, and for overall fairness and compliance with legal and ethical standards, opening up the black box to auditors. Furthermore, data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, similar to those required under GDPR for processing likely to result in high risk, should be mandated before the launch of any new technology, product, or service that could have a significant impact on individual privacy or other rights. This forces companies to proactively think through and document the risks before they deploy, not just react after harm occurs. Identify and mitigate risks upfront.
Audits and impact assessments. Proactive checks. What about the fundamental incentives of the companies themselves?
That's the deepest level, and perhaps the most transformative potential reform. Ultimately, a true paradigm shift in corporate accountability may necessitate rethinking the very legal duties of companies that handle our personal data. A powerful reform proposal, gaining traction among some legal scholars, would be to establish a statutory fiduciary duty of care for companies handling personal data. This would legally obligate companies to act in the best interest of the individuals whose data they control, similar to the duties lawyers have to clients or doctors have to patients. This would mean they have a binding legal duty of loyalty and care to protect their users' data and privacy, potentially overriding their duties solely to shareholders to maximize profit from that data, especially when those duties conflict. Users' interests would come first legally. Such a standard, if properly defined and enforced, could fundamentally realign corporate incentives. It would shift them away from inherently exploitative data practices towards genuine, trustworthy data stewardship. It would compel them to treat our data as a sacred trust to be protected, not merely as a raw resource to be plundered for profit. It changes the game at the board level.
A fiduciary duty for data. That would be a massive shift.
Really interesting. Okay, so we have legislative reforms, a new model for corporate accountability. What about the third piece you mentioned? Beyond these top-down laws and internal corporate shifts, what can we, as individuals and as a collective society, do? Because it can feel like such a massive, overwhelming problem sometimes, and people want to feel like they have some agency, some way to fight back or protect themselves right now.
That's a crucial question. While top-down legal reform and fundamental internal corporate change are absolutely essential for systemic change, they often take time and face immense political hurdles. So a complete framework for reclaiming privacy must also include a powerful bottom-up empowerment of individuals and the strengthening of civil society organizations. These groups act as a vital counterweight, a crucial check on both government and corporate power, holding them accountable from the outside.
So what can individuals do practically right now? Well, for individuals, there are immediate steps you can take to mitigate some of the privacy risks you face daily by adopting privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs. These are tools, software, and practices specifically designed to minimize the collection of your personal data, maximize your online security, block tracking, and generally empower you with more control over your digital footprint. Examples include using privacy-focused web browsers like Brave, DuckDuckGo, Firefox with strong privacy settings, or the Tor browser for maximum anonymity. These are built from the ground up to block trackers and protect your data better than standard browsers often do. Employing a reputable virtual private network, or VPN, can mask your real IP address and encrypt your internet connection, making it much harder for internet service providers, Wi-Fi network operators, and websites to track your online activity back too. Using end-to-end encrypted messaging services like Signal or WhatsApp for messages, though Meta still collects metadata, ensures that only the sender and the intended recipient can actually read your messages, not the company providing the service for eavesdroppers. And critically, simply being mindful of the permissions you grant to mobile apps. Does that flashlight app really need your location and contacts? And regularly reviewing and revoking unnecessary permissions can significantly limit the data apps collect from your phone. Be skeptical about permissions. Now, it's crucial to acknowledge that PETs are not a substitute for systemic reform. They often place the burden of protection back on the individual user, requiring technical savvy and constant vigilance rather than fixing the underlying broken system. But in the current landscape, they are an important necessary tool for personal digital self-defense. They give you some measure of control back.
Digital self-defense, I like that. So use better tools, be mindful of permissions. Yeah. What about collective action?
That's where advocacy and watchdog organizations come in. Their role is, simply put, indispensable in this fight. The continued, tireless work of groups like the Brennan Center for Justice, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, EPIC, Electronic Privacy Information Center, Fight for the Future, and many others at national, state, and local levels, is absolutely vital to maintaining checks and balances in the digital age. They work through multiple avenues: strategic litigation, bringing groundbreaking legal challenges against unlawful surveillance programs or unfair data practices in court; through investigative journalism and research, exposing abuses of power by governments and corporations that might otherwise remain hidden; through public education campaigns, raising awareness among the public and policymakers about the risks and the need for reform; and through direct legislative advocacy, lobbying for stronger laws and fighting against bad bills, providing expert analysis and counter-arguments to industry lobbyists. These civil society institutions provide the essential expert counter-pressure necessary to hold both government and corporate actors accountable. Supporting these organizations, whether through donations, volunteering your time or expertise, or simply amplifying their message and calls to action, is a critical investment in protecting our collective civil liberties. They are the organized resistance.
So supporting the watchdogs is key. Anything else on the societal level?
Yes. Finally, there is a long-term fundamental need for enhanced digital literacy across the entire population, starting from a young age but continuing throughout life. A public that is better educated about precisely how their data is collected online, how it's used and analyzed by algorithms, how it's bought and sold by data brokers, and how it's monetized by platforms. Is a public that is inherently less susceptible to manipulation, less likely to fall for deceptive practices, and far more likely to understand the stakes and demand meaningful systemic change from both companies and lawmakers. Knowledge is power here. Educational initiatives in schools teaching critical digital citizenship skills, comprehensive public awareness campaigns using accessible language and easily available resources can empower citizens. Empower them with the foundational knowledge they need to navigate the digital world more safely, make more informed choices about the services they use, understand their rights, and effectively advocate for themselves and for broader reforms. It's about empowering everyone to be a more discerning and engaged digital citizen, not just a passive user or consumer.
Digital literacy for empowerment. That feels like a crucial long-term investment. So wrapping this up, we've walked through a profound crisis today, haven't we? The unchecked expansion of the surveillance nexus, this powerful, truly symbiotic alliance between data-driven corporations hungry for profit and security-focused state agencies hungry for information. We've seen how this system, fueled by the logic of surveillance capitalism and increasingly weaponized by opaque AI and facial recognition, is steadily eroding our fundamental rights to privacy, autonomy, and free expression, and how it's amplifying existing inequalities, placing disproportionate burdens on already marginalized communities. But, and this is the crucial part we ended on, we also see a path forward. This state of affairs is not inevitable. It is not predetermined by technology. It is the direct result of specific, contestable policy choices, regulatory vacuums allowed to persist, and commercial incentives we have permitted to dominate. Choices can be changed.
Exactly. And the path forward, therefore, is not about rejecting technology outright. Technology itself isn't inherently evil. It's a tool. The path forward is about unequivocally reasserting democratic control over technology's development, its deployment, and its governance. We need to be in the driver's seat, not the technology or the companies maximizing profit from it. Reclaiming our fundamental rights to privacy, autonomy, and free expression in the digital age demands a deliberate, systemic, and unwavering effort to dismantle this architecture of surveillance and replace it with something more rights-respecting. And as we've laid out, this effort must be multi-pronged. It can't be just one thing. It demands comprehensive legal reform at the federal level that unequivocally establishes data privacy as a fundamental human right, not just a consumer preference to be negotiated away. It requires a new paradigm of corporate accountability that moves beyond performative self-regulation to legally mandate privacy by design, ensure independent oversight, and perhaps even impose a true fiduciary duty of care on those who handle our most sensitive information. And finally, it absolutely depends on the continued empowerment of individuals through privacy-enhancing tools and digital literacy, and crucially, on the vigilant, unrelenting engagement of civil society watchdogs who hold power, both corporate and state, to account. It takes all three working together.
So what does all of this mean for you, for all of us, as we navigate this increasingly complex, often overwhelming digital world every single day? Perhaps the central challenge of our digital age, the question we all need to grapple with, is how do we forge a new social contract for our technological world? One that ensures technology serves human values, enhances human dignity, and supports human liberation, rather than becoming primarily a tool for pervasive control, manipulation, and the entrenchment of power. The stakes, my friends, for our privacy, for our democracy, for the future shape of our society, they really could not be higher. Thank you for diving deep with us today on this critical issue.